Here's some news from the world over. Washington, D.C.'s longest-running hospital, Catholic hospital, is one step closer to shuttering its doors. Providence Hospital, located near the Catholic University of America, was founded as a teaching hospital in 1861 by the Daughters of Charity at the invitation of President Abraham Lincoln. Providence received its charter by an act of Congress that year. Despite its long and storied history, its parent company, Ascension Health System, said that the closure is due to the fact that the hospital has been operating at a multi-million-dollar loss for years. More than 1,000 babies were born each year at Providence. Alas, last year, obstetrics was closed. This month, acute care is being shut down, leaving only low-level emergency room care as its only operations. It will close completely in April of next year. Some Catholic and union leaders have objected to the closure, accusing Ascension of abandoning its mission to the poor and putting profits before patients. Providence is only one of two hospitals in the eastern half of the district where most low-income earners are served. Joining me now with his thoughts on the ongoing media coverage of the abuse crisis, the Pope's thoughts on priestly vocations, and the big Catholic news of the week is the president of the Catholic League, Dr. Bill Donohue. Bill, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, last month, the Boston Globe and the Philadelphia Inquirer ran articles saying that an examination of court records, media reports, and interviews with church officials, victims, and attorneys led them to the conclusion that more than 130 bishops, nearly one-third of those still living, have been accused during their careers of inadequately responding to sexual misconduct in their dioceses. Now, Bill, you wrote the editor-in-chief of the Boston Globe asking him if their report could be verified. What were you seeking there?
Well, mostly I was interested in the interviews, because now you're into a more interpretive world. And quite frankly, when you're talking about victims groups and you're talking about lawyers, I've exposed a number of them as frauds, as liars. And that's really what I was interested in getting to. At first, I was blown off, but then I was persistent. And then someone finally got to me. And I said, listen, I'm a sociologist. I like to look at the raw data. And why won't you give it to me? Can I at least read the transcripts of the interviews? They said, well, we do interviews every week and we don't publish the transcripts. I said, yeah, but those are news stories. This is a study. You're making public the conclusions based on a study, and you're not going to allow me to verify anything that you've said. And that's exactly the case. I mean, quite frankly, nobody should take this as a serious study. I believe that many of the people they probably interviewed, that we'll never know because they're not going to disclose, are people who I think are damaged. Give you one quick example. A few years back, Terrence McKiernan of a group called Bishop Accountability said that Cardinal Dolan of New York was hiding the names of 55 predator priests. I've contacted him many times. I said, explain to me, give me the information, reveal the names. Who are they? Who's Dolan hiding? To this day, I've never gotten them. Now, this is what bothers me, Raymond. These people in the Boston Globe, Philadelphia Inquirer, they are insisting on transparency on the part of the bishops. But it's a one-way street. I'm not allowed to see the raw data upon which they make public conclusions, and this is a scam. Nobody should give the Boston Globe study any credence whatsoever.
Now, you mailed all of the bishops of the U.S. And
Yes.
asked them, I guess you communicated your exchange with the Boston Globe. What have you heard from the bishops?
Well, quite frankly, being that the post office was closed for the funeral of the president, there's been a delay there, and I put it in the regular mail. So some of them are probably just getting it now, quite frankly.
Well, so what do you think is the upshot of this investigative study that the Globe and the Philly Inquirer conducted? You don't think it has credibility?
Well, look, I mean, all I know is this, as a professional sociologist, I've done studies, and I've commissioned others to do studies, and I've done my own work in the past. And I give out to people the data upon which I draw my conclusions. Why won't you allow me to at least read the transcripts of the interviews? They're probably right about the court records and some other things, and media reports, because that's hard data. But you get into the subjective here, and they're saying these are accusations made, not found guilty, that they didn't make an adequate response. Well, I'd like to make a decision as to whether or not their interpretation of an adequate response is something which is respectable or not.
Yeah.
But now they're closing it out. So it's a one-way street when it comes to transparency.
Bill,
Therefore, I don't take it seriously.
On Monday, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled 6-1 that the Pennsylvania grand jury report on the Catholic clergy cannot make public the names of 11 priests who challenged the release of their identities. They claim that doing so would violate their reputational rights as guaranteed by the state constitution. Now, the priests had maintained that they did not have the opportunity to challenge the accusations made against them to the grand jury. How do you feel about what happened there, and what kind of precedent do you believe this sets for other AGs and the investigations we're seeing play out across the country?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. The Catholic League had an amicus in that case. And I give a little shout out here to Kathy Gallagher and the other lawyers at Porter Wright, whom we used out of Pittsburgh, because, again, I smelled the rat. You know, I was condemned uniformly over the summer for raising serious questions about the objectivity of the Pennsylvania grand jury report. Some clown at the Weekly Standard actually said that the grand jury report was factual. It's not factual. No grand jury report is factual because they don't give anybody an opportunity to rebut anything. You're going to name priests, okay, probably many of them were guilty, but not all of them were. And if you're going to release the names of people, many of whom are dead, they have nephews and they have nieces. And what about those who are alive and claim that they never, ever were involved in any kind of wrongdoing? You never gave them a chance to rebut this. That's why we filed suit in this particular case. And here's the upshot of it. Had all the priests throughout the 6 dioceses out of the 8 that were looked upon in the Pennsylvania grand jury report, had they all said, listen, we want our names redacted, the entire grand jury report would have imploded. That's how serious this stuff is. There is a reputational right in the state constitution in Pennsylvania. By the way, 34 states in this country have either reputational rights or character rights, very similar, in their constitution. And so this could really make a very big difference. Again, I know what some people might think, well, you're trying to protect the bad guys. Nobody wants to see the bad guys be given the kind of justice they deserve more than Bill Donohue. No. But it's a big but. What about the rights, the due process rights of priests, many of whom are innocent?
Bill, you've suggested that the AG in Pennsylvania is singling out the Catholic Church. However, should these type of AG investigations not be taking place? I mean, Catholics want answers and transparencies, and we have to be honest and say many of these bishops, many of these dioceses have not been forthcoming. So to the minds of the laity, even though it seems it is extreme and no doubt invasive, the Catholic people are saying, you know what, we couldn't get the answers, so let the AGs have their way. You would say what?
I would say this, go ahead and have your report, but allow every person whom you're naming an opportunity to present his case. I know of people like Bishop Troutman, for example, who to this day maintains his innocence, and he's furious because they never gave him a chance to say anything. Look, if somebody were to say something serious about me today or about you, Raymond, today, about something that we did in the past, I want to know the name of my accuser. I want to see his or her face. I want an opportunity to rebut the charges. And if you don't give an opportunity to rebut them, then due process means nothing. And that's exactly why I'm concerned. This is all used as a setup to tee it up for the guys in Harrisburg so that they can revoke the statute of limitations. And will they go after the public schools? No. Will they go after other religions? No. This is a game. We have been played by these people, and Catholics need to wake up. 13
other states are having similar investigations, Bill. Do you think it's going to play out the same way that Pennsylvania did?
Well, it might, because guess who's involved in trying to contact them? There's actually 14 states and the District of Columbia, and that's next on our list. We're going to contact them, especially those who have those laws, those 34 laws, which are very similar to Pennsylvania. Now, look, the bishops have to make their own decision. I don't make the decision. My advice is do not cooperate with people unless you have to legally, and make sure there's a level playing field. Otherwise, I tell these guys, take a walk.
Yeah, well, look, I think when it's abuse of minors, when it's apparent abuse, they have to go to authorities, and they should be doing that, whether it's a bishop or a priest. But there is something to be said here about reputation. And Bill, as somebody who in recent days has been slandered and attacked for no good reason, just because I'm here, this strikes me in a certain way, hearing about this, and I know too many priests who have been sidelined by accusations that are false and then have a very hard time returning to ministry or getting their name back, even when the name is cleared. That is a problem in the church today, and I hate to say it, but the same spirit we're seeing in the world, we're seeing in the church, where people's reputations are laid waste to, and others think they can just demolish them with no accountability or facts. That's a problem. That's a big problem.
Well, yes, and you've taken some hits unjustifiably. If somebody wants to attack you, let them do it in a statement, and let's see some data. You know, it's not just the Boston Globe. Let's see some data. Yeah. Don't put out your tweets.
No.
The other thing is,
I'm happy to take a shot. You're in the public eye. If I do something wrong or anybody else, call us out on it. I'm happy to respond. But ad hominems, they don't float here on the world over. I want to move on to another topic, an important one, Bill. In a new book due out this week, Pope Francis says he's concerned about the issue of evaluating and forming people with homosexual tendencies in the clergy and consecrated life. Pope Francis gave the book-length interview to a Spanish-born missionary priest, and the book is based on 4 hours of conversations the two had in August at the Vatican. It's entitled The Strength of Vocation. In it, Pope Francis has this to say about society's influence regarding homosexuality in the church. He says the issue of homosexuality is a very serious issue that must be adequately discerned from the beginning with the candidates. If that is the case, we have to be exacting. In our societies, it even seems that homosexuality is fashionable, and that mentality in some way also influences the life of the church. Bill, I want your initial reaction to the Pope's statement here.
Well, everything he said is true. He gets it. Others don't. The New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times wouldn't even print what you just described, even though Reuters and others did, because they don't want the public to know that the Pope is not exactly on the progressive side on this particular issue. Yeah, look, we all know that the scandal is driven almost exclusively by homosexuals. They account for over 80% of all the cases of abuse. And so to pretend at this late hour that we don't have a homosexual crisis. It's never been about pedophilia. Never. How do I know? Because the John Jay study itself said that less than 5% of the cases between 1950 and 2002 involved prepubescent males. So that doesn't mean that all homosexuals are predators. It does mean that the big problem in the church has been homosexuality, and in particular, a subculture of homosexuality. That subculture needs to be smashed. It needs to be rooted out, particularly in the seminaries. It doesn't belong.
Francis said he was told by one religious superior that the issue is not that serious. It's just an expression of affection. And the Pope said this in this interview. He said, that's a mistake. It's not just an expression of an affection. In consecrated and priestly life, there's no room for that kind of affection. Therefore, the Church recommends that people with that kind of ingrained tendency should not be accepted into the ministry or consecrated life. The ministry or the consecrated life is not his place. He goes on to say, we have to urge homosexual priests and men and women religious to live celibacy with integrity, and above all, that they are impeccably responsible, trying to never scandalize either their communities or the faithful holy people of God by living a double life. Now, Father James Martin and others in this week's America magazine are suggesting that the Pope's comments should be taken in context of his previous comments, like, who am I to judge? A psychologist at Santa Clara University says the Pope is not a mental health professional, Bill Donohue, and that his comments on deep-seated homosexuality lack understanding. Your reaction?
As far as this situation here, the Pope says, who am I to judge? What he's saying is that if a person happens to be homosexual, or for that matter, heterosexual, we're not going to pass judgment on his sexual orientation. I'm all for that. But what the Pope is saying, he's talking about behavior, all right? They have to know it. His critics know it. He's talking about a homosexual subculture. And that's the real problem here. And to live in a state of denial is wrong. And these psychiatrists, by the way, are part of the problem, because they're the ones who told the bishops, we got this guy fixed. John Jones is fixed. Father Jones can go back into ministry. They're incompetent, and they should have admitted it in the first place. Now they're doubling down again and only creating even more problems. Kudos to the Pope for speaking the truth.
The excerpts from the book, Bill, are consistent with church teaching, yet Francis has said and done things to suggest that he has a broader thinking on this homosexuality question. I mentioned the Who Am I to Judge. There was also the Vatican approving a priest as a rector of a Catholic university who had said and maintains that homosexual couples should receive blessings in the Catholic Church. So how are we to put this in context?
Well, admittedly, there are a lot of conflicting statements that have been made by the Pope and some others, and they need to get on the same page. Let's take a chapter out of the liberal playbook. Let's say maybe he's evolving. How's that? Maybe he's evolving. Let's encourage him to evolve. The idea that anybody in any senior position in the Catholic Church, for that matter, any priest, who claims that two guys should be able to get married, they're in the wrong religion, quite frankly. They ought to do the decent thing and find the exit door. We don't believe in that as Catholics. We never have for 2,000 years, and we're not going to change our teaching just because, as the Pope says, it's become fashionable to think so. Let's get on the same page, and I think the Pope does need to speak with greater clarity on this and certainly greater consistency.
Bill Donohue, finally, George H.W. Bush was laid to rest this week. Now, you wrote a piece about him. You had a personal connection to him at one point. Tell me about that as we leave.
In 1988, I was at the Heritage Foundation. What got me there was a book called The Politics of the American Civil Liberties Union. Then I wrote another book on the ACLU. And I had all the inside data, you know, the data that I actually make available to other people, unlike the Boston Globe. And so when Michael Dukakis in Spencer, Iowa, bragged that I am a card-carrying member of the ACLU, Bush, 41, made an issue of it. And Tom Brokaw made the remark that, my God, is this the whole thing about the presidential campaign? It's all about the ACLU? I was in constant contact with the White House, and I fed them the information they needed so that in the first presidential debate, Peter Jennings asked Bush about why does he have a problem with the ACLU. I had fed Bush 5 controversial issues, like their defense of child pornography. He used 4 of them quite effectively. And then the New York Times and the ACLU said he distorted. He didn't distort anything. It's all up on my website. I have the facts. I had the policy guide. And I'm glad to have played that small role in helping the man out. He was a man of great distinction.
Bill Donohue, thank you for being here. You can follow Bill Donohue and the work of the Catholic League at catholicleague.org. Thanks again, Bill.